Hi guys, welcome back. We've got a really cool one this week. Now, after the frankly poor performance of the 9015 out at 100 yards last week, it got absolutely smashed by the XTI. Now, the reality of it is it should have done better. The biggest single difference between the two rifles ultimately that I can think of is the barrel twist rate. The Anschutz factory barrel that's inside the shroud here has a slower twist rate than the Walther barrel fitted to the XTI. This here is a CZ s200 barrel. It was robbed from a Mark II s200. We are also going to test in some really strong windy conditions today. A bit of a shoot off really between the JSB derivatives and the H&Ns. So we've got exact heavies. I use these a lot, one of my preferred pellets, a decent batch of Air Arms Diablo fields, and we're going to shoot those against the newer Baracuda 8s and the two sizes of Baracuda FTs. I'm hoping that one of these batches of pellets will perform better than any of the others in the wind. We're going to monitor the drifts and the drops at 55 yards to start with today, and once we've got an established winner, if there is one, then we're going to look in the next couple of videos at optimising this even further. So there's a lot to do. I'll see you at the farm. Right then guys, we're here. So I've just rigged up the chrono setup. I'm setting the power with the JSB Exact Heavies. Now, we've used these ones numerous times. These are the batches that I have from 2021. Now, I have a lot of these. So, of course, going forward, if they prove to be any good, we've got plenty in stock. Now, I've just run a few shots off. The barrel that we've now got in here is a couple of inches longer than the factory barrel. So, of course, the power increased just a small amount, up to 715 feet per second. So I backed that off just a tiny bit. I was aiming for 710 feet per second, so I gave it a tiny little bit. We went just down to 707, then we went back up to 711, so we're basically bang on. It's incredibly consistent, this rifle, and the ammo that we're using, they're pretty well sized. They're pretty consistent over the chrono, as you can see. So I'm very happy with how that's now set up. What I do just want to quickly check is that we're roughly on the 0. Doesn't make much of a difference at this stage because we're basically going to be looking at the dispersion of the groups, the group sizes, and the wind drifts more than anything. That's really what I want to actually look at today as opposed to anything else. So chances of banging in tiny little groups are probably fairly slim. That's not what we're after. I just need to find a pellet that's nice and easy for me to learn with this barrel. Hopefully it'll play ball, and going forward we can look at optimizing it a little bit further. We will use both of the JSB versions first. So of course we've got the JSB Exacts and the Air Armors Fields. They're both made by JSB, and then we're going to swap over to the harder H&N pellets. Doing it this way round with the softer JSBs first just makes life a bit easier. You can pretty much swap, certainly in these barrels, I've been using them a good few years now, we can swap over to a harder pellet after the softer pellets with only a few shots to lead everything in. So if we went the other way round from an H&N to a JSB, we end up wasting a few extra pellets, but going from the JSB to the H&N just speeds things up a little bit. Right, as you can see, there's no expense spared on the targets. I forgot my other ones, I left them at home unfortunately. However, we've just got to quickly check the 0 just so we don't get any nasty surprises when we get down range. I've just topped her up, just under 200 bar. Let's just quickly see where we end up, shall we? Very minor scope adjustment. Give it 5 clicks left and 3 clicks up. Now don't forget, I've given this barrel a quick polish as well before we came out, so it may take a little while for these to come on. Right, for the sake of testing, we'll call that good. Now we're going to get out into the fields. Of course, it's windy out there. It's intentionally windy. We're going to have quite a strong breeze running from the left to the right, so we're going to get some fairly decent wind drifts. Now, of course, that's what I want to monitor. The thing that I really struggle with, if you've seen any of my shooting before, especially when we've got a tailwind or we're shooting into the wind, you get quite a lot of elevation change on some of the groups. Now, that's the hardest thing to get your head around and try and learn. It's practically impossible. It becomes that sort of an intuition, if you like. Hopefully, one of these pellets that we've got to test today will give nice, even, consistent spreads that are easy to learn. Let's get out to the field and see what we can do, eh? Right, I'm just getting everything set up. We're going to be out at 50 metres, so that's 55 yards. That's the maximum distance that's shot in field target. Now we've got plain cards for the moment. I've just put a cross up in the top left here because the wind is running from the left to the right. Now I'm going to use my 25 yard 0 here. So our groups are likely to come in a couple of inches down here, and we're likely to see a bit of a drift from the left to the right on account of the wind. Now I'm always going to be aiming at this little cross here. Whole point is to measure the drift and the drops. Now what I'm hoping is that the groups, they will have a slight downward trend as the wind pushes them further across, but I'm hoping that the group may be more like the sort of size of that piece of tape there. So when we was getting out to the further ranges, the groups were getting 2 or 3 times as tall as that, and I just couldn't judge it. So this is what we're hoping to do, is find a pellet that drifts consistently in the wind, that I'm comfortable and confident using, and gives minimum sort of elevation change. Now of course you can see that the 9015 action is incredibly consistent, so that sort of elevation change is not down to the rifle, it's not down to the pellet speed or anything like that. It's simply the wind doing its thing. So we're hoping to find a nice little group down here somewhere, maybe about 1 inch tall, and then probably up to 3 or 4 inches of wind drift actually, if we get caught by the bigger gusts. Right then, let's have a little go. Now that grass is getting up really quick. I only mowed it last week when we was at 100 yards. The old buttercups and the daisies and things are growing really quickly in the field just to the left of us. Hopefully you can see that in shot. That grass is probably a good 18 inches tall already. I think we can just about clear some of the grass now. I'll just be aiming top left of the card, the wind. Hopefully you can see the little stick there. It's gusting quite hard at times, probably nearly 20 miles an hour. The wind's actually coming towards us slightly now, which is brilliant, because that's some of the more testing conditions. It's sort of coming across almost sort of 10 o'clock-ish. Right, let's have a little go then. I can feel a little bit of resonance with this slightly longer barrel actually, compared to the shorter Anschutz one. Once we've decided on a pellet, then we'll get the air stripper fitted, and we'll do that in a different video, but then we'll optimise the air stripper setup, and maybe we'll also look at potentially doing a moderator for it as well, one or the other. So we've got about 2.5 mil dots of drop. We've only got 0.5 mil dot of drift there. I was hoping that we might get hit by some of these bigger gusts, so typically ones just come across then. I'm going to actually hold out now for some larger gusts of wind and let the shots off when it's blowing. The wind definitely picked up when I let that one go, but it didn't drift a huge amount. Oh, they're really stacked. I mean, we've used these pellets before, we know that they're pretty good. Now of course the proof will be in the pudding when we get further out, but today it's certainly too windy, and I certainly wouldn't feel confident trying to shoot at 100 yards with this wind as it is at the moment. Even with that big backstop, I wouldn't feel confident I could keep them on there. Well, that'll probably do with these. We've used these before. Let's go and have a look at those. That group, considering we're not aiming off and the wind is pushing towards us a little bit, that's pretty good. I would have hoped for slightly less elevation change than that, but we'll try the others next and see how they all compare, and then we'll run going forward with the best of the lot. So let's go and have a look. You won't really hear it when the camera's tucked down in the grass, but you can probably hear that wind noise now through my pellet flight line. Just as we're coming up, it's actually whipping through quite a lot. Right, let's stop that. There you go. So what's that? Just over 1 inch group, something like that. We'll measure it up properly when we get home, but we had 2.5 mil dots of drop from the 25 yard zero, and we've really only got just over 1 inch of drift there, so quite easy to get to grips with. Really quite happy with that. We're going to swap the cards over now, and then we'll go on to the Air Arms fields. Now they are an 8.4 grain pellet, so in theory the groups should be coming in slightly higher, but we should potentially see a little bit more wind drift if the science plays ball today. So let's have a go at that, shall we? Right then, so we've got Die 7 Air Arms Diablo fields. These are from 2023, so these are the recent ones. Interestingly, the XTI doesn't really like them. I mean, they're okay, but they're certainly not going to set the world alight. The little Catran shoots these really quite well. Now, over the last 2 years that I've had that, that's definitely had a preference for a harder pellet, sort of the QYS and things like that, and some of the H&Ns. Big ant on there, get rid of that. So the first few shots may be a little bit wayward as it was just swapped from the heavies. However, because they're made of the same lead, they don't tend to take much time to swap over at all. But same again, aiming at the top left hand corner. It'd be interesting if they actually follow the physics behind it. At the moment that's only dropped about 2 mil dots, as it ought to. that wind was really blowing then, that's given us quite a bit of drift. But nothing too out of the ordinary actually, which is good. That's what we're looking for really. Of course, it's all well and good having nice calm conditions, but you learn more shooting in the testing conditions and the wind. It's just stacked on top of the other one, it's pretty good. There was little point in me testing some of the really old batches of pellets I've got. I've got some sort of from 2010 and stuff like that now. The reason I'm not testing them is because if they do happen to be really good, of course we've only got remnants of my collection. I can't buy any more. So all of the ones we're testing at the moment are much more recent batches, and we stand a very good chance of being able to shop around. If we find a particularly good batch, we can use that batch code and then buy some more. Whereas of course, chances of buying 15-year-old pellets, no chance. I mean, they're stamping exactly where you'd expect them to. They feel nice and slick loading into the barrel. Come on then, let's just get one more off and then move on to these H&Ns. And one of the geese is having a little wander through. Better shoo him off on the way down. Right, so let's go and have a little look at those. Right, cards are swapped over, so we have got the H&M Barracuda 8s. Now we've used these before as well, of course. I can't remember whether we used them through the CZ barrel in this before. Now I would certainly like to start making a switch over to H&M where I can, simply because they're a lot more affordable than JSBs now, and they seem at the moment to be that bit better in terms of consistency of manufacture through a tin. However, I've not really had any really decent performance at the extreme ranges with any of the H&Ns. Past about this sort of distance, they seem to open up a little bit, but let's see how this barrel goes and see what happens. So same again, top left. I've got a spider on me. Come on. Now of course we've just swapped from the softer JSBs over to the H&Ns, so the first few shots we'll just have to be mindful that the pellets are scrubbing out some of that JSB lead that's in there, so we need to make sure that we're fair, or at least mindful of that's what's happening. Whoa. Right, that was a fairly big gust of wind, but that skewed off like a beast. Ooh, they're looking pretty good. Now the B8 is effectively H&N's version of a JSB 8.4 grain or an Air Arms Field, or all the various derivatives. But of course these are made out of a slightly harder lead alloy, and they're quite a bit cheaper. Now of course it's very hard to say that the conditions are going to be the same throughout the test, because of course they're not. However, at the moment we've got a very similar amount of drop on these to the JSB heavies, and we've actually got a little bit more drift as you'd expect, being that they're a lighter pellet. Now of course I'm trying to judge the wind as best as I can, but of course I'm not perfect. We've got no real way of telling what it's doing, but at the moment the drifts feel pretty good, apart from those two which I would say were a little bit on the erratic side. So have to eyeball it and go with what your gut feeling is on it really. See that one again. I don't think a JSB heavy would have drifted like that in that breeze. And this is what it all comes down to, whether or not you've got stamped little groups. They're great for showing off and bragging to your mates, but you need to know what they're going to do when you're out in the wind. And yeah, we've got some that are really well stamped. There's quite a few that look like they're stamped on top of each other in fact, but we're getting these weird ones that I can't really account for. Now these would probably be absolutely perfect to use indoors where you've got no breeze. These feel very consistent on loading, and I tell you what, they are pretty accurate downrange, but at the moment that wind is catching me out a little bit. Send one now. definitely drifting more than a heavy would do at that sort of wind speed, or certainly from what it feels like to me. Now of course I have the eye shoot in the wind all the time, get a fairly good feel for it. Picking up. That's quite an interesting group shape really. Let's go and have a look at that. That group is only just over 0.5 mil dot tall. Not too bad. Let's go and have a look. That's the group that we've just shot. Now of course we have got a slightly wider group here. The wind is fairly erratic. Now these couple over on the very right hand side here, I don't think a heavy would have drifted quite as much as that. Now of course you'll see on the footage there that the wind had picked up when I let these shots off, but that did feel a bit erratic to me. But other than that, these are actually really quite well stamped in here, to be honest. So would I swap from a heavy to a Barracuda 8? Probably not. If I was trying these indoors, I'd almost certainly want to be sticking to some of the H&Ns. I mean, the Barracuda FTs, for instance, are one of the most popular bench rest pellets, but of course a lot of that's shot indoors and outdoors at 25 yards, sort of shorter distances. So don't know, let's swap over to the Barracuda FTs now and see if we can get some tighter groups in, shall we? Right, Barracuda FTs, 4.5 ones. These are the bench rest shooter's pellet of choice. They are incredibly consistent out the tins, and when you're looking at what most of the world champions and the top bench rest shooters use, it's these. So let's see what we can do downrange. And we've used these before, of course. The 4.5 ones were actually slightly more accurate than 4.5 zeros in the XTI barrel. Let's go, same again. Now the wind actually feels like it's picked up a little bit. Of course, don't forget at this moment we're swapping from one to the other, so they may take a little while to settle in. Of course, the last lot we ran through were the 8s, made of the same lead makeup as these, so it shouldn't take too long, but that was a lot of drop there. And there's always arguments with these. I'm going to have to shoot that goose off in a second. Hang on a moment, let's get this shot off quick. That's not too bad. Right, that goose has got to go. Stay there. Come on, go, go, go. That's what you want for a little bit of accurate shooting, a nice little sprint in the middle. How people do biathlon and all that, it's beyond me, and target sprint. Anyhow, there's always arguments why these run slower, whether it's because of the harder lead makeup or whether it's the friction in the barrel, whether there's blow by because they don't seal in the barrel quite as well as the softer pellets. But either way, these will be making less power. Oh. Right, carry on. Where did that one go? We literally just stamped that on. Did it miss the card? Oh, that'd be cool if these stack like that. Can you hear the buzzard in the background? Squawking. They've been really active up here the last few weeks. The swallows have arrived. All the cool little birds are out. All the birds of prey. Sparrowhawk was out yesterday. A few kestrels. What? We're going to have to check the footage because actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually add a bit more holdover now just to bring my group slightly further up onto the card. So I'm going to hold over, use the same aim point at the top, but I'm just going to hold over a mil dot, so it'll bring the group up a bit up the card, alright? So they're definitely running slower and they are dropping more than the JSB heavies, but at the moment they certainly look pretty good in the wind. The groups are pretty stacked. Well, at the moment, I've got to say, the Barracuda FTs are doing really well. Right, let's get one more off for luck, but I think that's probably quite telling already. Have a proper look at that, but I've got to be honest, they felt pretty good. They certainly felt like when the wind picked up they didn't drift quite as much as I thought they should do. That's surprising. We'll swap over to the other ones in a second. Well, that's pretty cool. Don't forget we've got two sort of groups here. I adjusted my elevation. I was giving it an additional mil dot of holdover for this lot. Of course, when we got hit by the bigger gusts, we've got the drift, but actually the wind drift on there and the elevation change is beating most of the JSBs so far. Now this one, of course, the conditions were getting a little bit more windy, a bit more elevation change, a little bit more drift, but overall that's actually a really good start. Now we're going to swap over to the 4.50s, the slightly smaller ones. They're the last ones of the test. Hopefully they will go in there quite well, because generally, and it's a bit of, again, another broad generalisation, this barrel layout that we're using in the Anschutz, of course, we've now got the CZ barrel, but the way that they load into the barrel, they generally prefer a slightly smaller pellet. So if we can get some slightly better performance now for the 4.50s, I'll be well stoked. So let's try it. Right, last ones. 4.50 Barracuda FTs. Now, when we tested these last time, the 4.51s slightly edged them. Let's give them a little go, shall we? The interesting thing is, they are actually marginally smaller than the 4.51s, whereas when you actually measure up the JSBs, the size that's printed on the tin usually bears no resemblance to what's actually in it. Right, let's go. These are certainly nicer to load. The 4.51s were a little bit rough on the old thumb, sort of seat them in quite firmly. These ones glide in nice. Not bad at all. Still a lot of drop. Depending on how this all pans out, I think when we do get a break in the weather next, maybe we'll do a shoot off between the best of these Barracudas and the JSBs out at 100 yards, eh? That'd be a fun one to try. And then we'll pitch them all against the 2016 JSB heavies that I haven't got many left of. So we've got about 3 mil dots of drop and just a little bit either way of a mil dot's worth of drift, so pretty good. By the look of things, these have got the least elevation change of the lot. They're all very broadly on the same elevation line, which makes life a lot easier. Well, they look like they've got a slight edge then over the 4.51s. They definitely feel better loading. Right, that'll probably do it for the moment. I'm getting red hot. Now these definitely feel smoother to load. The group actually is marginally better than the 4.51s, so the 4.50s have definitely beaten those. Let's have a quick go on the old Crowzilla, shall we? Easy. That's 35mm target at 55 yards. I'm quite surprised. The H&Ns at the moment are certainly easier to get hold of, and they seem to be arriving in better standards than the JSBs. The JSBs, because they are softer, they are much more susceptible to sort of transit damage and things. These, because of their inherently harder design and lead makeup, they are that little bit more resilient through the post. But these ones, the smaller ones of the two, feel a lot better to load. So we'll collect these cards up, have a look at home once I've had a drink, because I am absolutely roasted now. So I'll see you at home. Right, granted it's much smaller sample size of the 4.50s than the 4.51s, however they certainly feel a lot better. You can tell immediately that they're a nicer fit in the barrel, so we're definitely going to revisit these. We're going to then look at tuning an air stripper. I'm a bit concerned about that huge amount of drop at sort of 50 metres. Of course, when we get to double this range, of course it's going to be probably twice, 3 times. In fact, it's going to be probably nearly 3 foot of drop, I should imagine. But at 50 metres, dropping a 35mm Crowzilla, easy, especially when you're prone. Quite easy to judge actually, only running a few off. So we'll get these cards back and I'll see you at home. Right then guys, we're back. That got red hot out there in the end. I was desperate for a drink by the time we packed up. We'll quickly start on the 2 lighter pellets. So we've got the Barracuda 8s and we've got the decent batch of Air Arms Diablo Fields. Now the physics and the actual ballistics actually played ball today. Both of the lighter pellets actually drifted more than the corresponding heavier weight pellets, but we did also get marginally less drop on both of these, but the difference is very negligible. People always ask and sort of suggest that JSB heavies are terrible downrange in terms of the drop, but when you look at a decent batch of 8.4s and a decent batch of JSB heavies, look, if we take the centre line of both of them groups, there really isn't an awful lot in that. If you're dialing in field target, for instance, with your scope and your range finding with your scope, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't give the JSB heavies a try. They certainly drifted less in the wind as well. You can see that they're basically the group. If we take that line here and follow it down, you've got nearly twice the drift on the lighter 8.4s than you have of the JSB heavies. But I really want to get onto the heavies because that's most likely what I'll end up using out at 100 yards and further. So let's move all this around quick. Right, the interesting thing, this CZ barrel definitely shoots the Baracuda pellets, the Baracuda FTs, both batches of those better than the Anschutz barrel did. The Anschutz barrel was never particularly good at the extended ranges with anything H&N. It had a definite preference for the softer JSB made pellets. Now again, compared to the heavies, I've got to be honest, we definitely need to do some further testing with these. Now the drop on both of the Baracudas is a fair bit more. We've got almost another inch and a bit drop on both of these. Of course, I ended up having to hold over a little bit more to bring this section of the group slightly further up. But in terms of the actual drift, you can see that this group has slightly less elevation change and a tiny bit more wind drift than the JSB heavies that I'm used to. So we definitely are going to have to come back to these. We're going to get an air stripper fitted to the barrel and see if we can optimize it for both of them. The 4.50 ones certainly felt very nice. Now, I really like the JSB Exact heavies. However, they are getting harder and harder to find decent batches of them. If I can use any of the H&N stuff that will give me roughly the same groups down range, I will probably end up making the swap over to the H&Ns from the JSBs, purely because these are likely to arrive to me in better condition than the JSBs, purely on the account of the fact these are slightly harder, they're less susceptible to transit damage. They're certainly more consistent in the build quality, but generally speaking, the JSBs do have a minor edge down range. So we do really need to push these out to 100 yards. The 450s and the JSB Exact heavies are so close, it's ridiculous. These did exactly as I expected them to. These actually dropped a little bit more than I was anticipating, but of course they will be running slower. So swings and roundabouts really, but we've definitely got two to go through. The 4.50s and the JSB Exact heavies, we're going to then use these. It's nice to see as well that the 9015 is still running as consistently as ever. Them chrono strings I did when I was setting it up was getting sort of 3 to 4 feet per second variation between shots, so it's absolutely on song. And of course that highlights that this elevation change that we were seeing out at the extreme ranges when the groups were sort of 8 inches tall, not the rifle. The rifle's doing exactly as it ought to. It's just the pellets are becoming quite unstable, especially shooting into a headwind or with a chasing tailwind. So all quite interesting stuff. No clear winner at the moment yet, but is the CZ barrel better than the factory Anschutz barrel? Well, it definitely is with the Baracuda pellets. Is that a good thing? Well, probably yes, because it gives me more stuff to choose from going forward. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that at the moment. I'm going to get this all painted up and cleaned up nicely, find a nice air stripper for that for some further testing, and the minute that wind dies off again, we're going to get this back out alongside the XTI at 100 yards and see if we can sort of at least match the XTI down range. So that'll do it for this one, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.